The system designed to protect us can sometimes become the very source of our humiliation. This is the story of Elijah Vance, a man whose brilliance built empires, but whose skin color made him a threat in the eyes of airport security. In one of the world's busiest travel hubs, he was publicly shamed, accused, and dismissed. But his accusers made a fatal miscalculation. They didn't realize they weren't just harassing a passenger, they were challenging a king. He didn't just file a complaint. He didn't just sue. He raised $200 million and launched one of the most audacious corporate raids in history, with a single goal to buy the very ground on which he was wronged and tear the system down from the inside. The air in the Orion Club at JFK's Terminal 4 was engineered to be an anesthetic. It was cool, smelled vaguely of bergamot and leather, and was filled with the gentle, clinking hush of people for whom time was a commodity, and comfort was a non-negotiable term of existence. Here, amidst the brushed chrome dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of jets taking flight, Elijah Vance was in his element. Or so he thought. At 38, Elijah was the founder and CEO of Vance Logistics, a name that was gospel in the world of supply chain management. His company didn't just move boxes. Its proprietary AI, Synapse, predicted global trade winds, rerouted fleets around brewing geopolitical storms, and managed inventories with a prescience that bordered on clairvoyant. He was dressed in a way that signaled wealth, without shouting it, a custom-tailored Zegna travel blazer over a simple black t-shirt, dark jeans that cost more than most people's rent, and a Patek Philippe on his wrist that was a masterpiece of understated engineering. He was on the phone, his voice a low, urgent hum that was part of the lounge's ambient symphony of success. "No, listen to me, David," he said, pacing a small, self-prescribed circuit near the window. "The migration isn't the problem. It's the latency post-handshake. We need to secure the primary asset before we even think about bringing the tertiary nodes online. If we lose the package during the transfer, the entire quarter is compromised. I want a full diagnostic, and I want it 10 minutes ago." To the uninitiated, the words were jargon. To anyone in his world, it was a standard high-stakes conversation about moving massive amounts of data between servers. The package was a critical dataset. The asset was their primary client's new inventory system. But in the post-9/11 world, in a place where paranoia was a form of professionalism, words could be weapons. Carl Thorne saw a weapon. Thorne was the head of security for Global Air Terminal Services GATS, the private consortium that ran Terminal 4. He was a man in his late 50s with a bulldog's jowls and pale, watchful eyes that had seen too much and understood too little. A 20-year veteran of the NYPD, before taking this more lucrative private sector gig, he carried the unshakable conviction that he could read people in a single glance. He saw the world as a simple binary of threats and non-threats, and his internal algorithm was rife with the malware of prejudice. When he looked at Elijah, he didn't see a tech CEO. He saw a black man, agitated, dressed in clothes that to Thorne's mind were either fake or ill-gotten gains. He heard words like secure the asset and lose the package, and his brain, bypassing all logic, jumped to the most sinister conclusion possible. He had received a quiet flag from one of the lounge attendants, a young woman intimidated by Elijah's intense pacing. That was all the justification he needed. He approached not with a question, but with an accusation cloaked in politeness. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice." Elijah, distracted, held up a finger, signaling for one moment. "David, execute. I'll call you back." He ended the call and turned to Thorn, his expression shifting from focused intensity to mild annoyance. "Is there a problem?" "You're causing a disturbance," Thorn said, his voice flat and authoritative. He positioned himself slightly to the side, a classic police stance to protect his weapon. The gesture was not lost on Elijah. "We've had a complaint." Elijah glanced around the hushed lounge. A few heads were turned, their curiosity piqued. He saw no disturbance. "A complaint? I was on a business call. You were speaking in a very aggressive manner about packages and assets," Thorn said, infusing the words with a dark significance. "What's in the briefcase, sir?" Elijah looked down at his sleek leather Tom Ford briefcase resting against his chair. It contained a laptop, a tablet, and a sheaf of financial reports. The question was so absurd, so nakedly accusatory, that for a moment he was speechless. "My computer," Elijah said, his voice dangerously calm. "And some papers. Would you like to see my quarterly earnings report?" The sarcasm was a mistake. It was a challenge to Thorn's authority. "I'm going to need you to come with me, sir. We need to have a chat." "I'm not going anywhere. I'm a first-class passenger in a private lounge where I hold a premium membership." Elijah stated, his patience evaporating. "I haven't done anything wrong. That's for me to decide." Thorn snapped, his professional veneer cracking to reveal the raw prejudice beneath. He gestured to two of his uniformed subordinates who had materialized behind him. "You can do this easy, or you can do this hard." The world seemed to shrink around Elijah. The murmur of the lounge died. Every eye was on him. He saw the judgment, the suspicion, the flicker of fear in the faces of the other passengers. He was no longer Elijah Vance, CEO. He was a threat, a problem to be removed. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from his chest to his face. "This is ridiculous," Elijah said, but his voice was drowned out by Thorn's command. "Take him." The two guards moved in. They didn't put hands on him, not yet, but their presence was a key. He was being escorted out of the Orion Club, past the very people he would normally network with, under the accusatory gaze of the man who had already tried and convicted him. They led him not to a quiet office, but to a sterile, glass-walled room just off the main concourse, a place designed for maximum visibility. A fishbowl for suspects. Thorn stood outside, arms crossed, as one of the guards went through his briefcase. The laptop was turned on. The financial reports were leafed through with ignorant suspicion. An hour crawled by. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. David, no doubt, wondering what was happening. Finally, after a call to the Port Authority police, who ran his name and found nothing but a speeding ticket from 2018, they were forced to concede. There was no threat. A junior officer, looking embarrassed, brought his things back. "You're free to go, Mr. Vance. We apologize for the inconvenience." Thorn was nowhere to be seen. No apology from him. No acknowledgement of his gross misjudgment. He had simply melted back into the airport's bureaucracy. Elijah walked back towards the Orion Club, but he stopped at the entrance. The magic was gone. The anesthetic had worn off. The air now felt suffocating. He could still feel the stairs. He turned and walked away, finding a deserted gate area. He sat down on a hard plastic chair, the kind he hadn't sat in for 15 years. The humiliation had curdled into something cold and hard in his gut. It was a feeling he knew from his youth, a ghost he thought he had outrun, with success. He had built a fortress of achievement around himself, believing it would make him untouchable. Today, Carl Thorne had walked right through the gates and reminded him that to some people his fortress was invisible. He pulled out his phone, but he didn't call David back. He called a different number, one he reserved for the impossible. "Isabel," he said when she answered, "I have a new project for you." "Elijah." "It's 8 p.m. Is this about the Singapore acquisition?" Came the crisp, no-nonsense voice of Isabel Sterling, the sharpest mergers and acquisitions, banker on Wall Street. "No, something more personal," Elijah said, his eyes fixed on the GATS logo on a passing maintenance cart. "I want you to find out everything you can about a company called Global Air Terminal Services. Ownership structure, board members, debt load, vulnerabilities, everything." There was a pause. Isabel was processing. GATS. The JFK operator. That's a private consortium. They're not on the market. What is this? Elijah watched a plane ascend into the night sky, a silver needle stitching the darkness. His voice was quiet, but it held the chilling weight of absolute resolve. "I want to buy the airport." Isabel Sterling's office on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in Hudson Yards was a testament to organized aggression. It was minimalist, glass-walled, and offered a panoramic view of Manhattan that seemed to place the entire city at her feet. Isabel herself was much the same, impeccably tailored, razor-sharp, with a mind that moved like a predator. When Elijah Vance spoke, she listened because his personal projects had a history of being wildly profitable. But this was different. "Let's be precise, Elijah," she said, tapping a stylus on a glass-topped desk that was also a data screen. "You can't buy the airport. JFK is owned by the City of New York and operated by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. You can't buy a government entity." Elijah, sitting opposite her, hadn't slept. He'd flown to his home in Connecticut, showered, changed, and driven straight to her office for their 7 a.m. meeting. The anger in him had not dissipated. It had been forged into a cold, clear purpose. "I don't need to buy the Port Authority," he corrected. "I want Terminal 4. GATS. You said it yourself, they're a private consortium. Who are they?" Isabel's fingers danced across the screen. Financial data, corporate filings, and news articles swirled into view. "Global Air Terminal Services. Their anchor is the Dutch airport operator Schiphol Group. They have a significant stake. The rest is a patchwork of smaller investment firms, and interestingly, the airline itself. Delta has a piece of it, as it's their main hub. It's a complex structure designed to be stable and resistant to outside influence." "Everything has a weakness," Elijah stated. "Find it." For the next 2 hours, they dove into the corporate architecture of GATS. It was exactly as Isabel described a fortress. Schiphol Group was a behemoth, but as they dug, a fissure appeared. It wasn't in the ownership, but in the operations. GATS, while profitable, was complacent. Their profit margins had been thinning for years. They were carrying a significant amount of debt, leveraged to fund a recent expansion that had run over budget. Their CEO, a man named Richard Davison, was a legacy hire, the son of a former board member known more for his golf handicap than his business acumen. "Here," Isabel said, circling a series of figures in red. "Their debt is serviced by bonds that are trading slightly below par. Their latest quarterly report shows a downturn in retail and concession revenue. Davison blames the economy, but my gut says it's mismanagement. They're heavy, slow, and arrogant." "Can we launch a hostile takeover?" Elijah asked the question blunt. "Not in the traditional sense. It's not a publicly traded company with millions of shareholders. You can't just buy up stock on the open market," Isabel explained. "But you can buy the players. You can make an offer so good that the partners in the consortium are forced to consider it. You go to the smaller investment firms first. You go to the bond holders. You create a pincer movement. Who are we talking to? Isabel brought up a list of names. Partners at private equity firms, fund managers, institutional investors. The strategy would be to create a new entity, a shell corporation. Let's call it Aero Prime Holdings. It will be anonymously funded. We start making quiet inquiries, buying up their corporate debt. Once we have a significant leverage position, we make a direct offer to one of the smaller equity partners. A generous offer way above market value. How much are we talking? Elijah asked, his eyes not leaving the screen. To get their attention. To make them break ranks with Schiphol. You'd need to be prepared to offer at least a 20% premium on the terminal's valuation, Isabel calculated. GATS is valued at roughly $1 billion. A controlling stake would mean, well, it would be a very expensive statement. You're looking at a capital outlay of hundreds of millions. Elijah didn't flinch. His company, Vance Logistics, was valued at over $20 billion. His personal wealth was a significant fraction of that. This wasn't about a return on investment in the traditional sense. I have $200 million in liquid assets I can wire by noon, Elijah said. Leverage my portfolio for the rest. I don't care what it costs. I want controlling interest. Isabel leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. This was the kind of audacious, impossible play she lived for. Richard Davison won't know what hit him. He'll see it as a nuisance, an inquiry from some no-name fund. By the time he realizes it's a serious attack, we'll already own his debt and have a partner on the inside. There's one more thing, Elijah said, his voice dropping. I want to know who the head of security is. His name is Thorne, Carl Thorne. I want to know his employment history, his service record, his position within the company. Personnel files might be tricky, Isabel said. Get them, Elijah commanded. The plan was set in motion with breathtaking speed. By that afternoon, Aero Prime Holdings was incorporated in Delaware. The $200 million was transferred. Isabel and her team of analysts, sworn to secrecy, began their silent campaign. They operated through intermediaries, buying GATS corporate bonds in small, untraceable blocks. They opened back-channel communications with a mid-sized private equity firm in Chicago that held a 7% stake in the consortium. The offer they floated was astronomical, a 30% premium cash. Meanwhile, a private investigator, a discreet former Mossad agent Isabel kept on retainer, began digging into Carl Thorne. The report came back 2 days later. Thorne's record was a tapestry of mediocrity and veiled complaints. He'd left the NYPD following an internal affairs investigation into a wrongful arrest case with racial overtones. The case was dropped, but the stain remained. At GATS, he was known as a rigid by-the-book manager who fostered a culture of suspicion. He had a high rate of staff turnover and a disproportionate number of passenger complaints filed against his department, many of which had a common racial denominator. He was protected by CEO Richard Davison, who appreciated Thorne's old-school approach to security. Richard Davison, for his part, was blissfully unaware. He received a memo from his CFO about some unusual activity in their bond trading, but dismissed it as market noise. He received a call from the partner in Chicago mentioning a vague but compelling offer, and told him to ignore it, assuming it was a competitor trying to spook them. He was more concerned with finalizing the catering for the GATS annual golf retreat at Pebble Beach. In his glass-walled office, Elijah Vance worked with a chilling focus. He managed the complexities of his global logistics empire with one part of his brain. With the other, he watched the silent, invisible war being waged on his behalf. He saw the bond ownership percentage for Aeroprime Holdings tick up point by point. 5%, 8%, 12%. They now held enough debt that if they called it in, it would trigger a crisis for GATS. The partner at the Chicago firm, tempted by the mountain of cash, agreed to a secret meeting. The mechanism of power was turning. The gears were grinding silent and deep within the foundations of corporate finance. And at the center of it all was Elijah, a ghost in the machine preparing to bring the entire temple down. The humiliation at the airport had not broken him. It had given him a target. The first public shot was fired on a Tuesday morning. It didn't come from a press release or a public declaration. It came in the form of a single paragraph in the Wall Street Journal's Heard on the Street column, a piece of expertly placed information leaked by Isabel's team. An obscure investment vehicle, Aeroprime Holdings, has quietly amassed a significant debt position in Global Air Terminal Services, the operator of JFK's Terminal 4. Sources suggest the fund, backed by an unknown billionaire, is preparing a tender offer to the consortium's minority partners, a move that could challenge the decades-long control of the Dutch Schiphol Group. The paragraph landed like a grenade in Richard Davison's morning coffee. He stared at the text, his mind struggling to connect the dots between the market noise and this. He bellowed for his CFO, who came running, his face pale. The call from the Chicago partner suddenly made sense. This wasn't a spook. This was a raid. "Who the hell is Aeroprime Holdings?" Davison demanded, throwing the newspaper across his mahogany desk. "Find out, I want a name." But there was no name to be found. Aeroprime was a black box, its funding shielded by layers of corporate law. The raid now moved into the open. Formal, confidential offers were delivered via courier to the three smallest equity partners in the GATS consortium. The terms were brutally simple: a cash buyout of their entire stake at an unprecedented 35% premium over the most generous valuation. They were given 48 hours to accept. The GATS boardroom, a stuffy wood-paneled affair that hadn't been updated since the 1990s, became a war room. Davison, flustered and angry, tried to rally the partners. "This is a predator," he argued, his voice shrill. "A vulture trying to dismantle a stable, profitable enterprise for a quick buck. We must hold the line." But the mountain of cash on the table was too high to ignore. The partners, who had been nursing grievances about Davison's lackluster leadership for years, saw an exit ramp paved with gold. The Chicago firm was the first to break ranks. They formally accepted the offer. Their 7% was now Elijah's. Panic set in. With one partner gone, the hold-the-line argument weakened. Another firm controlling 4% followed suit 24 hours later. In less than a week, Elijah Vance, through Aeroprime, controlled 11% of GATS and held a significant portion of its debt. He wasn't a majority shareholder yet, but he had a seat at the table and a knife to the company's financial throat. From his security office in the bowels of Terminal 4, Carl Thorne watched the news with detached interest. It was corporate maneuvering a world away from his reality of guard schedules and security checkpoints. He felt secure. He was Davison's man. His job was safe. He was more concerned with implementing a new, more aggressive random search protocol he'd devised. The connection was finally made by a dogged reporter from Bloomberg, who managed to trace the initial funding of Aeroprime back to a trust managed by a bank known to handle the personal finances of one Elijah Vance. The headline was explosive: "Tech mogul Elijah Vance revealed as hostile raider targeting JFK terminal operator." The article detailed the timeline of the takeover. And then in the final paragraphs, it posed the multi-million-dollar question why the reporter had uncovered the inconvenience at the Orion Club. A source had detailed the public humiliation, the groundless accusation, the involvement of head of security Carl Thorne. When Thorne saw his name in the Bloomberg report, the blood drained from his face. The corporate battle was no longer remote. It was about him. He, a security chief, had provoked a billionaire into a corporate war. The idea was so preposterous, it was terrifying. He tried to call Davison, but the CEO was in endless emergency meetings. Thorne was left alone, the fluorescent lights of his office suddenly feeling like an interrogation lamp. Elijah now made his final move. He didn't need a majority stake to win. He just needed to cripple the existing leadership. Isabel arranged a meeting with the executives from Schiphol Group, the Dutch giant that was the senior partner. The meeting took place in a neutral law office in Geneva. Elijah walked in alone. Across the table sat 3 stern, grim-faced Dutch executives. "Mr. Vance," the senior executive began, "this is a reckless and disruptive adventure. You are destabilizing a critical piece of global infrastructure for what appears to be a personal vendetta." Elijah listened patiently. When the man had finished his tirade, Elijah laid out his case. It was not emotional. It was a cold, hard execution. "I am not a wrecker," Elijah said, his voice even. "I am a builder. Vance Logistics is a testament to that. Your American operation, however, is failing. Your leadership is stagnant, your revenue is down, and your brand is being damaged by a culture of incompetence and prejudice." He gestured to a folder his assistant had placed on the table. "This contains my analysis of GATS's operational inefficiencies. My team believes we can increase concession revenue by 40% in 2 years through modernization. It also contains the file on your head of security, Carl Thorne, including a dozen complaints filed against him that were buried by your CEO, Richard Davison. That is a massive legal and PR liability you are currently ignoring." He then delivered the final blow. "I currently control 11% of the company. I also hold enough of your debt that I can force a restructuring that would be extremely painful for you. However, I am offering an alternative. I will buy another 30% of the equity from you at a 20% premium. That is a generous cash infusion for your European operations. In exchange, I want a controlling stake, the CEO's resignation, and a completely new board. You can retain a minority stake in a more profitable, better-run company. Or you can fight me, and I will bleed you dry in the courts and in the press." The Dutch executives were cornered. They were businessmen, not crusaders. They looked at the numbers. They saw the logic. Fighting would be costly, and the outcome uncertain. The story of the racist security chief and the incompetent CEO was a PR nightmare they didn't want. They accepted the deal. The following Monday, an emergency board meeting was called at the GATS headquarters. Richard Davison walked in, blustering, ready for a fight. He found the Schiphol executives and the partners he thought were his allies, looking at him with cold detachment. A lawyer formally announced that a controlling interest in the company had been sold to Aero Prime Holdings. The door to the boardroom opened, and Elijah Vance walked in. Davison stared, his mouth agape. "You—" "Mr. Davison," Elijah said, his voice devoid of triumph, holding only the flat finality of a death sentence. "Your tenure as CEO is over. Your resignation is effective immediately. A generous severance package has been prepared contingent on a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement." He then turned his gaze to the company's general counsel. "And please inform Mr. Carl Thorne that his employment with Global Air Terminal Services is terminated effective immediately. Have security escort him from the premises. He is not to set foot in this terminal again." In his basement office, Carl Thorne received the call. He was told to pack his personal belongings. A box would be provided. 2 of his own junior guardsmen he had trained stood awkwardly at the door, tasked with watching him. The humiliation was absolute, a perfect mirror of the degradation he had inflicted on Elijah. As he was walked through a service corridor past the baggage carousels and the rumbling machinery of the airport, he considered his kingdom he was just another anonymous, disgraced man. Elijah Vance stood in the empty boardroom, looking out the window at the ballet of aircraft on the tarmac. He had done it. He had bought his battlefield. The taste of victory was sharp, clean, and satisfying. But as he watched the complex, sprawling organism of the airport, a sliver of a new, unsettling thought entered his mind. Now, what victory Elijah discovered was not an event. It was the beginning of a new kind of war. The satisfaction of firing Davison and Thorne lasted for about 48 hours. Then the consequences of his corporate coup began to rain down, and he realized that seizing power was infinitely easier than wielding it. The first front to open was the media. Initially, the narrative was a simple, satisfying David and Goliath story, the brilliant black entrepreneur who fought back against racism in the most spectacular way possible. He was hailed as a hero in some circles, a symbol of a new form of economic protest. But then the counter-narrative began, seeded by PR firms, undoubtedly hired by Davison's allies. Op-eds appeared painting Elijah as a volatile, ego-driven billionaire who used his immense wealth to settle a petty score. He was a corporate predator, not a crusader. A right-leaning cable news network gave Carl Thorne a platform. Thorne, remade as a victim, told a compelling story of a dedicated security professional trying to do his job in a high-threat environment, only to be destroyed by a vindictive plutocrat who couldn't handle being questioned. He claimed his actions weren't about race. They were about behavior. "I saw an agitated man speaking in coded language," Thorne said, his face a mask of earnest sincerity. "In my line of work, you can't afford to be politically correct." He became a minor cause célèbre. A crowdfunding campaign was launched for his legal defense, and it quickly raised over $100,000 from people who saw him as a martyr of the woke mob. The narrative was no longer simple. It was a political Rorschach test, and Elijah's image was being distorted in the process. The second, more immediate front was internal. The employees of GATS, particularly the security staff, were terrified. They saw Elijah not as a liberator, but as a conqueror. Their boss Thorne, a man many of them disliked, but understood, had been summarily executed. They viewed his firing not as justice for a racist act, but as a warning the new owner was ruthless and could fire anyone on a whim. Morale plummeted. The security union, a powerful chapter of the Service Employees International Union, immediately filed a grievance over Thorne's dismissal, citing a lack of due process. It was a procedural move, but it signaled their distrust. Elijah's first all-hands meeting with the security staff was a disaster. He stood before 300 uniformed men and women in an auditorium in the terminal's basement. He spoke about his vision for a new culture, one of respect, professionalism, and security through service, not suspicion. They stared back at him with sullen, resentful eyes. To them, he was the man who had humiliated one of their own. During the Q&A, a veteran guard stood up, his arms crossed. "With all due respect, Mr. Vance," he said, the respect clearly absent. Mr. Thorne taught us to be proactive. You're telling us to be passive. Who's going to be on the hook when something bad happens because we were too scared to question someone who looked like they were having a bad day? The implication was clear, hanging poisonously in the air. Someone who looks like you. Elijah realized the problem was deeper than one man. Thorne wasn't an anomaly. He was a product of a culture he had then perfected. A culture of us versus them. And now Elijah was the ultimate them. He pushed forward with his reforms. He hired a nationally recognized security consulting firm to completely overhaul training protocols. The new curriculum focused on de-escalation techniques, behavioral analysis based on objective indicators rather than subjective bias and cultural sensitivity training. He allocated millions to upgrade the terminal's technology, fast-tracking the implementation of a new AI-powered surveillance system called Aegis, designed to flag genuinely anomalous behavior without human prejudice. It was a system born from the same technological philosophy as Vance. Logistics let unbiased data lead the way, but the changes were met with resistance at every turn. The union complained that the new training was corporate fluff that would make them less effective. The veteran guards grumbled that the Aegis system was just spyware designed to watch them, not the passengers. Productivity dropped. Sick calls increased. Anonymous complaints were leaked to the press about the chaos under the new ownership. Elijah was caught in a paradox. He had bought the terminal to root out a cancer, but the surgery was proving to be as traumatic as the disease. He was working 18-hour days, not from his sleek Vance Logistics headquarters, but from Richard Davison's old stuffy office in Terminal 4. He was dealing with union reps, disgruntled employees, and Port Authority bureaucrats who were deeply skeptical of his motives and methods. Isabel Sterling called him one evening. "The financial turnaround is on track," she reported. "The new concession contracts you negotiated are solid. On paper, you're a genius. But I'm reading the room, Elijah. The press is turning. This Thorne lawsuit is getting traction. You're winning the financial battle but losing the PR war." "I'm not trying to win a PR war," Elijah said, rubbing his tired eyes as he stared at a security dispatch report, detailing yet another minor but deliberate act of non-compliance from his staff. "I'm trying to fix a broken system." "Are you?" Isabel asked, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Or did you just buy a bigger cage?" The question haunted him. He looked out the window at the endless stream of people from every corner of the world flowing through his terminal. He had wanted to make this place safer and more dignified for all of them. But the very people he relied on to enact that vision saw him as the enemy. The crown he had seized felt impossibly heavy, and the throne was proving to be a very lonely seat. His act of personal justice had become a public quagmire, and he was sinking in it. The crisis, when it came, had nothing to do with racial profiling or billionaire vendettas. It was silent digital and utterly terrifying. It began at 3:15 p.m. on a Thursday, the peak of the transatlantic departure rush. The Aegis system, Elijah's multi-million-dollar AI security blanket, began to glitch. At first it was minor. A few camera feeds flickered. The facial recognition system designed to streamline boarding for premium passengers started misidentifying people. Then the digital departure boards all went black, simultaneously replaced by a single pulsing green cursor on each screen. Panic did not erupt. Instead, a wave of mass confusion rolled through the terminal. Thousands of passengers, suddenly untethered from their gate information, converged on the airline desks. The carefully managed flow of humanity devolved into a chaotic, directionless mob. In his office, which now doubled as a command center, Elijah felt a cold dread wash over him. This was a cyber attack, a sophisticated one. "Get the Aegis engineers on a video call now," he commanded to his new chief technology officer, a brilliant but perpetually stressed woman named Alani. "Lock down the internal network. No incoming traffic. Nothing." But it was too late. The attack was already inside the walls. The baggage handling system, a vast automated network of conveyor belts and scanners deep within the terminal, ground to a halt. Thousands of bags were stranded. Then the terminal's internal communication system went down. The radios used by the security and operations staff crackled with static and then fell silent. Elijah was now blind and deaf, presiding over a technological marvel that had been turned into a brick. His greatest strength, his faith in a data-driven automated world, had become his most profound vulnerability. The Port Authority police and the FBI were notified, but they were outside the problem. The immediate chaos was inside, and Elijah was in charge. He left his office and waded into the bedlam on the main concourse. The noise was a physical force. People were shouting. Children were crying. His security staff, stripped of their communications and digital tools, looked lost and overwhelmed. They were reverting to old, ineffective habits, shouting at people to calm down, which only fueled the panic. It was in that moment of supreme crisis that he saw him. Frank Miller. Miller was the veteran guard who had challenged him at the all-hands meeting. A man in his late 50s, with a weary face and 25 years of experience walking the floors of this very terminal. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't panicking. He was standing on a planter, using his height to observe the crowd, his eyes scanning not for threats, but for patterns. Elijah pushed through the crowd to him. "Miller." Miller looked down, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "Well, Mr. Vance, looks like your fancy computer system had a bad day." There was no time for pride. "The comms are down. The boards are dead. We've lost control of the flow," Elijah said, cutting straight to the point. "What do we do?" Miller looked at him, surprised by the direct, desperate question. He had expected arrogance, not a plea for help. He scanned the crowd again. "This is a pressure cooker," Miller said. "First thing you do is create a release valve. The International Departures Hall is the worst. We need to stop more people from entering it. Close the security checkpoints leading to the E and F gates, manually. Use bodies." "And the people already in there?" Elijah asked. "You need to give them information. Real human information. Forget the boards. Get every employee you have, from the janitors to the airline reps. Give them bullhorns if you have to. Write gate assignments on whiteboards. Walk through the crowd. You need to replace the technology with people. Right now, a human face is worth more than 1,000 computer screens." It was a lesson in analog reality. It was everything his data-driven philosophy wasn't. It was messy, inefficient, and entirely human. It was also the only thing that would work. "Do it," Elijah said. He turned to his COO. "Get me every whiteboard and marker in this building. Get the bullhorns from the emergency lockers. Spread the word everyone is now a mobile information desk." Then he turned back to Miller. "What else? The baggage system being down is a time bomb." Miller said, his eyes distant, running through old protocols. "People are going to miss their flights. They're going to get angry. But the real problem is security. That system doesn't just move bags, it scans them. Right now, we have thousands of bags sitting unscanned. We don't know what's in them. It's a potential threat vector." Elijah's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on the chaos, he'd missed the far greater danger. "There's an old protocol," Miller continued. "Code Nightingale. We haven't used it since the 2003 blackout. It's a full manual lockdown and sweep of the baggage areas. It requires every available hand. We form human chains to move the bags to portable scanners. It's slow as hell, but it's secure. For the next 6 hours, Elijah Vance, the billionaire tech mogul, worked alongside Frank Miller, the Union Guard he'd once seen as an obstacle. He didn't give orders from a command center. He was on the floor. He helped carry whiteboards. He spoke to frantic passengers, his voice calm and reassuring. He went down into the cavernous, silent baggage hold and helped Miller organize the human chain. He saw his security staff in a new light. Stripped of their tech and their controversial rule book, they fell back on training instinct and a deep institutional knowledge of the building's rhythms. They knew which corridors would jam, which gates were hardest to clear. They managed the crowds with a firm but calming presence. They were not the resentful antagonists from the meeting. They were professionals rising to a crisis. The FBI eventually traced the cyber attack. It wasn't a foreign state or a sophisticated hacker collective. It was a disgruntled former IT contractor for GATS, a man who had been fired by Richard Davison 6 months earlier for incompetence. He had left a back door in the system, a digital time bomb, and had chosen today to detonate it. It had nothing to do with Elijah, but it was his problem to solve. By midnight, a semblance of order had been restored. The hacker was in custody. The system was being scrubbed and slowly brought back online. The last of the delayed flights were being boarded. The terminal was a mess of discarded food wrappers and makeshift signs, but it was functioning. Elijah found Frank Miller near the security checkpoint, drinking a bottle of water. The older man looked exhausted, but wired. "You were right." Elijah said the words, costing his pride, but feeling necessary. "I was so focused on fixing the problems of the past. I built a system with a whole new set of weaknesses. I forgot that technology is a tool, not a solution. The solution is people." Miller took a long drink of water before answering. "Thorne was wrong, Mr. Vance. He taught us to see everyone as a potential nail, and he was the only one with a hammer. That's no way to run security. But you wanted to take the hammer away from everyone. Sometimes you need it. You just have to be damn careful how you swing it." Elijah nodded, the understanding dawning on him. He hadn't bought an airport. He'd inherited a city. A complex ecosystem of people, protocols, and pipes. His grand, dramatic gesture of buying the company was just the first step in a journey he was only now beginning to comprehend. The lawsuit from Thorne. The bad press, they seemed like trivialities compared to the immense, crushing responsibility of keeping this city safe. He looked around the terminal, at the weary faces of his employees, at the passengers finally heading to their gates. The weight of the crown was still there, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a purpose. 6 months later, the Orion Club at Terminal 4 was unrecognizable. The dark wood and heavy leather were gone, replaced with light oak open spaces and comfortable modern furniture. The air still smelled of bergamot, but it was mixed with the scent of fresh coffee from a new barista-staffed bar. The changes were more than cosmetic. They were philosophical. The club was still exclusive, but it was designed to feel welcoming, not fortress-like. Elijah Vance sat not in a secluded corner, but at a communal table, his laptop open. He was no longer a visitor here. He was the landlord. But his presence was different now. He had spent the months since the Code Nightingale incident not as a conquering CEO, but as a student. He had settled the lawsuit with Carl Thorne. His lawyers had advised him he would win easily, but Elijah chose to settle for a modest sum. The settlement came with a gag order, but more importantly, it came with a public statement from Elijah. It was not an apology, but a nuanced acknowledgement. Public safety and individual dignity are not opposing forces. The statement read, "Our mission at Terminal 4 is to prove they can and must coexist. We learn from our mistakes, and we are committed to building a system that is both secure and just." It was an act of de-escalation, a signal that he was done fighting the last war. His real work had been internal. He had established a new employee council with Frank Miller elected as its first chairman. The council had a direct line to Elijah's office and was consulted on all major operational and policy changes. The us versus them culture was slowly being dismantled brick by brick through communication and mutual respect. The Aegis system was back online, but its role had been redefined. It was now a support tool, not a replacement for human judgment. Its alerts were flagged to teams of analysts who worked with on-the-ground security staff to assess situations. Technology and instinct were learning to dance together. The new training programs once resisted were now being co-designed by the consultants and veteran guards like Miller, blending cutting-edge theory with decades of practical experience. Elijah's leadership style had transformed. He had traded his corporate raider's armor for a steward's work clothes. He knew the names of the shift supervisors, the best mechanics, the woman who ran the newsstand and the gate. E12. He had learned that the terminal wasn't a machine to be optimized, but an organism to be understood. He was still the unassailable owner, but he ruled through consensus and collaboration, not edicts. That morning he watched a scene unfold near the lounge entrance. A young man, probably a college student of Middle Eastern descent, was selected for a secondary screening. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. A security officer, a young woman Elijah recognized from the new training class, approached him. Elijah tensed, a ghost of his own humiliation flaring up. But the officer's approach was different. She didn't stand too close. Her voice was calm and low. "Good morning, sir. My name is Officer Simmons. You've been randomly selected for a quick additional screening. It will only take a moment. Could you please step over here with me?" There was no accusation in her tone. Her body language was open and non-threatening. She explained every step of the procedure clearly and respectfully. She swabbed his backpack for residue, had him walk through a scanner, and then smiled. "All right, everything is perfectly in order. Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Have a great flight." The young man, his nervousness gone, nodded and thanked her. The entire interaction took less than 2 minutes. It was professional, efficient, and dignified. It was security. Elijah looked over at Frank Miller, who had joined him at the table with 2 cups of coffee. Miller had seen the interaction too. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "See," Miller said, sliding a cup towards Elijah. "Not so hard, is it?" Elijah took a sip of the coffee. It was good. He looked out the massive window at the planes taking off, at the intricate, ceaseless dance of logistics and humanity on the tarmac below. The anger that had driven him to spend a fortune and upend an entire company was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, profound sense of ownership, not of the assets or the stock, but of the responsibility. He hadn't just bought an airport terminal. He had bought a second chance, not just for himself, but for the system itself. The victory wasn't the day he fired Carl Thorne. It was today, in this quiet moment, watching a stranger be treated with the dignity that had been stolen from him, and knowing he had helped build the foundation for it. The price tag, he thought, had been a bargain. Elijah Vance's story is a powerful reminder that the real battles are rarely about what happens to us, but what we do next. He transformed a moment of deep personal humiliation into a catalyst for revolutionary change. He proved that true power isn't just about having the wealth to buy your way to the top. It's about having the vision and the resilience to rebuild that top once you get there. His journey shows us that fixing a broken system requires more than just tearing it down. It requires the humility to listen, the courage to lead, and the understanding that the most advanced technology is worthless without the wisdom and dignity of the human beings who wield it. If this story of justice, karma, and the true meaning of power resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true life dramas. Let us know in the comments what you think about Elijah's incredible story.